city controller's office has three core functions. Accounting, we manage the city's books. That's microphone, sorry. Accounting, we manage the city's books. Accounts payable, we pay the city's bills. And then our auditing function, which evaluates economy, efficiency, and scale of city's priorities, programming, spending, laws, et cetera. So I spent 7 years at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. I have a keen interest in budgetary policy, particularly just making sure that we're in a situation where we can afford to do things that we say we're going to do. So in the last 6 weeks, I've been very active with city finances. I can tell you that if the city does not make changes, I am very confident that we will deplete our fund balance, which is right now around $160 million by the end of 2026. There are two key factors driving that. First and foremost, and I actually have an interesting statistic on the deed transfer tax too, which is unrelated, but related. So real estate. So downtown, 25% of the city's tax base, real estate tax base is downtown. As appeals are being heard, it impacts us in two ways. One, will owe revenue, we'll owe refunds. So we're at 7.5 owed right now in real estate tax refunds. That number will continue to grow until the courts catch up. The courts are still hearing cases from 2022. So throughout the year, it is almost certain we'll owe in excess of 10 million. It could creep closer just because the courts are slow. It could creep closer to 12.5 this year alone, and it'll continue into next year. After a property is reassessed from 2022, they can continue to file annual reassessment appeals downtown for these commercial office buildings. The second way that hits us is it impacts the expected tax revenue for that year. So right now we owe 7.5 in refunds from past years, in addition to not being able to collect 5.3 million for real estate taxes this year. So that is our number, like arguably the number one driver of our financial woes. And it's also a really hard thing to predict, because if we make changes and figure out a way to incentivize people to invest downtown, we can stop the bleed. But again, we have to act, right? City can't just twiddle our thumbs. Is that okay, thank you. I've had a rough day with sayings. So that is the number one issue driving city, the detour in city finances from being very stable to, we're dealing with significant issues. The second is the facility usage fee. The trial court and the Commonwealth Court have deemed this a tax, not a fee. Other states and cities have also had this overturned. The players' unions, NFL, NHL. Sure. So thank you. The facility usage fee is a fee assessed to people who perform in city-owned or city-subsidized performance venues. So it could be a concert. Taylor Swift paid the facility usage fee last year. It could be a player for NHL, NFL, I'm trying to get the acronym, baseball, NBA, no, MLB. Sorry, bad at that. So the players' associations have been very successful in challenging these fees. The most recent one was in the state of Tennessee and in the city of Cleveland. In both instances, the municipality or the state owed refunds to the players. The way Pennsylvania works with our uniformity clause, I would argue that I'm not a lawyer, famously not a lawyer, but it is very likely that we will also not be successful. The city should absolutely be challenging this to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which they have. Because we're a municipality, we're automatically granted a stay. The facility usage fee was enjoined with the collection. Our legal challenge was enjoined. But because we're a municipality, we're allowed to resume collection. I am against that because A, it effectively treats these performers as lenders to the city, because it's almost certain we'll owe this money back. And two, a best case scenario is that we are able to negotiate a lower liability than paying back the taxes from 2019 forward that were collected. So it's unclear to me if we have resumed collection. Those fees are collected quarterly, so March 31st, June 30th. So we wouldn't really see that collection and receipts from that until the end of June. But that is a $4.5 to $5 million annual tax revenue line or fee revenue line item. that we A, can't rely on moving forward, and B, will almost certainly owe some level of refund. I am hopeful that the city will be in a position to negotiate with the unions. As I've understood it in other municipalities and states, the goal of these lawsuits is not to recoup money, it's to discontinue paying it. Musical performers almost never seek refunds. Taylor Swift doesn't want her, I actually don't know how much she paid, and they all pay through an LLC. Taylor Swift doesn't want her money back, but the third round draft pick who played for the Denver Broncos for 1 year as a long snapper in 2019 does want his $4,500 back, right? So we would be liable. Theoretically, we could be liable 3 years prior, so 2019, and that would include compounding interest. So ideally, if the Supreme Court either defers to the lower court or rules themselves and rules unfavorably towards the city, we would be able to negotiate down and not owe that full amount, which is about $21 million if you rough math with compounding interest, because it's obviously from 2019, 2020. And I incorrectly at some point in the last month have said, oh, but in 2020, we didn't have any sporting events. We didn't have any in-person sporting events where you or I could go, but athletes were here playing. So there weren't concerts, but there were sporting events, and they still paid the facility usage fee. Hi to whomever joined. So those two are issues are the two significant changes with city finances. I will share with you, we're in the process of completing our 2023 annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR. It's the annual financial record for the city. It's produced from our office. It's 300 pages. But the one thing I noticed today was that the deed transfer tax brought in $15 million less last year than was budgeted. So we all know that this is not a housing market for buyers. Interest rates are super high. But I do think that will continue to decline as a percentage of our revenue pie. I wouldn't anticipate that President Biden's going to do anything that does could that be good for the economy? It could, but it also could decimate the economy. And I think he just wants, I'm saying this in a political capacity. I think you'll notice that the Biden administration just wants to keep things as stable as they can with the United States economy. So I would imagine that the deed transfer tax will continue to shrink as a part, at least this year. Hopefully the market changes for first-time home buyers generally. But I'm happy to take any questions about the office. Hi, you just walked in. I'm the city controller. My name's Rachael Heisler. Welcome. It's great to see you. Anyone? Yeah, Jack.
So prior to 1942, as the city looks doing its own assessment during the county off and just say, here's the assessment of the market value of the Pittsburgh, taxing based off those assessments. If you don't like it,
so our office would not be, so the city controller's money out, the city treasurer's money in, they have the real estate department. What I would tell you from my perspective is the best case scenario is we create a situation, and whatever it looks like is to be seen, where assessments and reassessments are done on a regular, fair interval. Because the big issue right now is that no one has seen any change in their property taxes in 20 years, effectively. I tend to think that the Fontana approach might be the most fair way to do it, because as an urban dweller myself, I don't care what happens in McCandless versus Cranberry, but I do think if you're in that community and thinking about buying a home, and Cranberry's property taxes are so much lower because they've never reassessed, like that does create, my family's from Canonsburg and they've always been in Washington County. Like it's not someone who left Bridgeville and moved to Canonsburg, but people who live in Canonsburg and have moved there in the last 15 years have done so almost exclusively because of property taxes, right? My big concern about the reassessment conversation right now is downtown is worth less money than it was 5 years ago, let alone 20. And my big worry is people who have elected to stay in their home. Pittsburgh has a high percentage of people who buy a house when they're, how old was I? I was 33 when I bought my house, and I'll probably own it until I die and when my nieces inherit it, right? And Pittsburgh has a high percentage of people like that. I live in the Central North Side. I am worried about my neighbors who bought their houses in 1965, 1970, and their property value, which is wonderful, right? This is how you create intergenerational wealth. Their property value skyrocketed. But if their property tax goes up in a way that is meaningful, and there's going to be a cost shift because if downtown's worth less, they're going to need to make up the difference elsewhere. Sorry. And we need to make sure that we're protecting people and allowing them to stay in their homes. Gentrification is an issue, but my bigger worry is that a property reassessment pushes people who have basically stood with Pittsburgh for the last 40 or 50 years when we were going through these horrendous economic times. They chose to stay in the city, right? If you bought a house in Brookline in 1980, you stood with us as a, and I wasn't born then, but like you stood with us as a citizen and as a resident, and we need to do what we can to make sure you're not priced out of your house, because you're a retired firefighter, a retired teacher, or retired, bank teller, and your property is worth considerably more. We just need to make sure that we're protecting those people and doing things that allow them to stay in their home, and that these increases in property taxes aren't going to force them to relocate, whether that's to Mount Lebanon or to Washington County. Jack. Mm-hmm. The windfall. Plan. Yeah.
The other thing that is for long-term property, for the taxes, for the increased taxes, either death or the
Oh, so
So it's a liability to the city, or that they owe to the city, but only when
they owe, or that the future that would be, it's almost like alert.
The property, it sounds like it would be a lien on the property, right? Until when the property is sold, that has to be paid.
Oh.
They don't have to.
They enjoy the appreciation when they sell it, but whatever is calculated is owed back from the date of that
Correct.
reassessment.
So then the idea
Yeah.
is that that's when, these homeowners are wealthy. They have to do it about the property. The idea is that.
But they're not cash.
They don't have
Yeah.
The idea is that we sell, that's when the cash is there.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's my understanding, and again, a lot of this conversation is not new, but it is newer because it's like we've not had the conversation about reassessments for a long time, that a lot of this is going to be managed at the county level. I do think that the city needs to do what it can, because we need to do what we can to preserve and give people the opportunity to stay in Pittsburgh. If we do anything that drives people out of the city, I mean, we have an issue with the school district. Like, people are already moving to Shaler, Penn Hills, Baldwin, Dormont, and going to Char Valley or Steel Valley. We need to do everything that we can to allow people to stay in Pittsburgh because they are our tax base. And we're already seeing the real estate markets slow. I'm sorry, you want to get started with me? Does anybody else have questions? Happy to talk about anything.
Jack will keep asking questions.
So I want to be a resource. I've committed to David 1,000 times, and I will reiterate to this group, we are going to figure out a way to do an audit of the zoning code. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like, because it is a complicated, as you would imagine, project. My number one priority is giving policymakers, the controller is not a policymaking body. We make recommendations, we do not make law. But my goal is to give policymakers the tools to make it easier for people to add on to their houses, build houses, to make sure we have a supply and demand issue, right? Hopefully no one's denying that. We need to make sure that we're doing what we can to allow people to invest in Pittsburgh, and whether that's a private, like a Jack, or if that's, someone who wants to build houses, we need to give people the tools, and we need to give policymakers the tools to make good choices and to make informed data-driven decisions. So I don't know when we'll start, hopefully before Labor Day. And I'm hoping that a product will come out at some point next year. I'm sorry, it is a long process. And I try not to get involved in the auditing process as a supervisor. But the one thing I will tell you, particularly as it relates to permitting and zoning changes, is we have, and this is unlike a lot of city priorities and programs, we have contact information for everybody who's filed a zoning appeal. whether they were for or against, whatever. If you registered to speak, we have your contact information. And I'm hoping that we can do some qualitative and quantitative analysis with people's interaction with the zoning code and people's interaction with the zoning board, and to give people the opportunity to actually share their own experience. Because I've never dealt with the zoning board, right? Like, I moved to the Mexican War Streets, besides getting confused about PLI with my roof permit, different issue, but I live in a historic neighborhood. You need like 7 permits to get a new roof. But I want to give policymakers the tools to make good decisions and informed decisions for what's best for people's quality of life, and for our ability to respond to the housing needs at the moment. So, Jack.
No more questions for now. We
You have
gotta,
my
we
email.
gotta move on to the next thing.
David is instructing us that we're moving on, but Jack, you have my email, and
Yeah.
that's my work line. I'll give you my cell phone number too. And also, I don't have to. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for having me.
Thanks, Rachel.